Warning: this podcast discusses content which may be disturbing or triggering to individuals who have ever experienced trauma. Please take care when listening to this show and remember, this is not medical advice. If you're having thoughts of hurting yourself or someone else, please text 741-741 or call the new nationwide suicide hotline number at 988. Hey everybody, I hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving, or at the very least I hope you survived your Thanksgiving. My family's usually more in the category of surviving rather than thriving, but I think it's important to remember that that's a-okay. It's okay to not be okay, not have everything be picture perfect like you see on TV. Just to reintroduce myself quickly, I'm Lacey Wilson. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Missouri since 2014, and I'm working on my doctorate in psychology. The focus of my dissertation is trauma and susceptibility to following an authoritarian leader. I'm still kind of figuring out exactly which direction I'm going to take that, but my dissertation is finally in the works, people, which is kind of a BFD, as Joe Biden once said on an accidental hot mic. Finally, I have some more notable people starting to follow me on Twitter, which is exciting. I have no idea how they found me, but I'm grateful that they did. Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat at NYU is a professor and expert in fascism, and I've been sitting in on her weekly Zoom chats for about 2 years now, and she was gracious enough to let me announce this podcast on there as well. So I'm hoping it continues to grow, and we'll see where it goes. This is such an important topic to talk about, how we've gone through mass trauma in the last decade or so with so many different things. And I think it's important to let it out in the open and talk about how it's a real thing. Everyone has had traumatic things happen to them in their lives, even with the best upbringing. So like I mentioned in the last episode, I tell kids it's a lot like throwing up. Nobody wants to do it, but once you do, you feel better. So let's throw up our emotional vomit and get to work on healing this mass trauma. So I want to talk about the midterm elections a little bit. Jared Yates Sexton, another expert in authoritarianism that I check in with and watch his YouTube chats, he said these elections, we managed to have a reprieve from the death penalty of our democracy, and I really liked the way he worded that. While Democrats lost the House but kept the Senate, the election actually turned out better than I expected, and I feel like we've managed to beat off authoritarianism. Did I just say beat off? Yes, I did. I think we managed to push back authoritarianism for another 2 years. There's going to be a ton of investigations into the Biden administration. We can count on that. And I would not be surprised if they try to impeach him multiple times, perhaps 3 times, because Donald Trump was impeached twice. What for? It doesn't matter. That's how authoritarianism works. We can rest comfortably, though, because they'll not have the votes in the Senate to ever remove him from office. But rest assured, there's going to be a lot of gridlock these next 2 years, and we can comfortably know that shenanigans are going to occur. We do still have the runoff election in Georgia, and really 51 senators instead of 50 is still going to make a difference. While Manchin and Sinema will still be thorns in our side, I do think it'll dilute their power a little bit. The hardest realization, though, to recognize is that even if Manchin and Sinema weren't doing this, the Democratic Party as a whole is still capitalism-focused as well, just in very different ways than the Republican Party. So there would be other Democratic leaders who are willing to fall in line and back capitalism instead. In reality, it's not just a Manchin and Sinema problem. The Republican Party has veered so far right that they're headed into fascism. And the Democratic Party is center-right, where the Republicans used to be. It's laughable when anybody calls this country socialist because we don't even have a truly left party. Finally, Trump is running for office again. Hooray! When looking at him versus Ron DeSantis, though, DeSantis has turned the state of Florida into a testing ground for autocracy. DeSantis and people like Governor Greg Abbott are using policies and executive orders in such a way that it's a testing ground to see what may fly on the national level. There's a book I recommend called Laboratories of Autocracy by David Pepper, which discusses this exact concept. The problem is, people are really going to like DeSantis simply because he's not Trump. He's well-spoken, highly educated, and claims to profess Christian values. He is very popular in the state of Florida, and he portrays himself as a man of the people. Since probably 2018 or so, I've been hearing experts on authoritarianism say that what concerns them the most is not necessarily Trump, but the far-right individual who gets into office after Trump. If we get a far-right individual who is actually competent, there's no telling what oppression and changes to our society could become. Trump was chaotic, but what we really need to be scared of is the one who actually knows what they're doing. So let's talk about what is trauma. Trauma is anything that happens to us that causes an extremely strong, painful, negative reaction of grief, fear, or loss. It's those things which consistently cause us to repeat the incidents in our heads, question our own sense of understanding and reality, and prevents us from moving forward. While by the book it says trauma is an event involving exposure to death or threats of death, I think it can go a lot further than that. I think you can have things like traumatic job loss, traumatic loss of relationships, traumatic loss of your identity or who you felt you were, or even traumatic loss of dreams you had for yourself or someone else, such as learning your child has a lifelong disability. You're going to have grief that comes with that because the dreams of what you expected are no longer going to be reality. These things can shatter your sense of how safe you thought the world was, what you thought your life was about, or what you thought your life would be. It then causes great despair that you need help to get through because you are so disorganized in your thinking that you're unable to resolve it yourself. It's also important to note that there's a difference between having something traumatic happen and being traumatized. Two people can go through the exact same experience at the same time, such as a car wreck, and one will be traumatized while the other one isn't. To wrap up for the day, let's talk about why this is. We know that females are more likely to have PTSD than males, but there is a question revolving around, are women just more open and likely to go to therapy and get the treatment that they need? We know that hands-on trauma tends to be more impactful than hands-off trauma. And what I mean by that are the things that occur that people do to you directly, such as sexual assault, stabbing, or shooting you, for example. It's those things that another human being chose to do to you against your will. There's something especially sinister about a human hurting another human, and that makes it more likely for you to experience actual traumatization. We also know the younger the trauma begins, the worse it tends to be for people. And that's because kids simply do not have the coping skills and the ability to work these things out, or the safety to protect themselves from harm when other adults fail to. Finally, there's this concept I like to call big T or capital T trauma and little t or lowercase trauma. Big T trauma are those things that are kind of once in a lifetime freak events or things that are so sinister that they deeply, deeply impact you. Natural disasters, school shootings, some sexual assaults could fall into this category. Little T trauma are those things that happen to you that maybe if they happen once, you'd be able to brush them off okay. But when they happen repeatedly, it really is like a snowball rolling downhill where it can snowball into big T trauma. These sort of things could be microaggressions about your race or disability or LGBTQ status, bullying, or things your parents may have said to you about your weight or your body, for instance. We know that trauma builds on itself, so unfortunately, the younger it happens and the more layered it is to happen over and over and over, makes you the most susceptible to developing full-blown PTSD. Interestingly, in my opinion, we also know that premature infants are more likely to develop PTSD, anxiety, and depression over their lifetimes. And I have an interesting theory about this. I myself was a 26-and-a-half-weeker. I was very, very premature in the late 1980s. And I have a theory that if in your little lizard brain that controls your bodily functions and your breathing and heart rate and things, if the first reaction to being born prematurely and having underdeveloped lungs is something like, "Help me, I'm dying," that may be a way to make you prone to believing that the world is a dangerous, scary place. Further, if you're in the NICU, you never know if the touch you're about to see is a loving touch from your parents, or if you're about to be poked or prodded with something that you can't get away from. So it's just a theory in my mind. Who knows if it's right? I actually thought about doing my dissertation on a topic revolving around that even. But for whatever reason, we do know that premature infants are more likely to experience mental health disorders throughout their lifespan. So let's put a pin in it there. Next time I'll actually crack open my DSM and I'll read to you the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. We'll go over it step by step and I will do my best to explain what it all means. There are also symptoms within it that I could break down into entire episodes themselves, and I actually plan to do that. So thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and tell your friends about this. Rating it on the podcast app will also help me to be seen by more people. Today, I'd like to thank Dr. Paul Tomlinson for writing my theme song of the Struggle Bus United States Anthem, as I call it. Curtis Harrington, my editor and producer, who is currently working for free. Thank you. And then I'd like to give a special shout out this week to Nicole D, my first patron on Patreon. And you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/US Traumapod, Twitter at US Traumapod, and YouTube at youtube.com/US Traumapod. Right now, the videos I put on YouTube are just exact replicas of this show, but maybe with time and more followers, I can do some fun things like Ask Me Anythings, or live streams where we can discuss politics and psychology. You can email me at ustraumapod@gmail.com, and if you like what I do and want to support me further, you can find me at Patreon on patreon.com/US Traumapod. All help and support is greatly appreciated, and with time, maybe we can build a real community around this. Alright guys, I'll let you go for now, but thank you so much for listening. I still plan to do these every other week, but if it gets to be too much with school, I will keep you guys posted. I appreciate you listening, and I'm so excited to keep going on this journey with everyone. I'll talk to you soon.